They told him the land was cursed, but John Hayward didn't believe in curses. Not until the earth bled. It began like any other morning in rural Ohio, 1856. Mist curling around the crooked fences, crows watching from blackened trees. A silence so deep you could hear the frost crackle under your boots. John was just a farmer, widowed, weary, and trying to make the soil love him again. But that patch of earth behind the barn, it refused. Crops withered there. Animals refused to graze. The dogs wouldn't go near it. But John was stubborn, the kind of man who didn't fear the dark until it looked him in the eye. So he dug. Not for treasure, not for roots, just to till it, just to break the old bones of the land. But after 2 feet, the soil turned black. After 3 feet, it was wet. After 4, red, thick, cold, sticky, and rising. Blood, not mud, not water, blood. And that's when he heard the voice. Not from behind, not above, from below. It didn't speak in words, not at first, just a kind of pressure, like someone whispering directly into your spinal cord. John stumbled back, heart pounding, spade falling from his hands, but he didn't run. He watched, listened, as the hole began to breathe. The neighbors said he went mad after that, said they saw him out at night talking to something in the pit, said the cows stopped giving milk, that babies wouldn't sleep, that when church bells rang, they echoed flat, like the sound had been sucked out of the valley. But John, he kept digging. He said it wasn't hell, not yet, but it wanted to be. And here's where the story leaves the pages of folklore and starts clawing into your reality, because what John found wasn't just under his farm, it's under all of us. You've felt it too, haven't you? That pulse in the basement floor, that shadow that waits too long in the hallway, that urge to dig when you're standing over soft earth. John wasn't the first, he wasn't the last. He was just the first man stupid enough to listen. They found his journal after the sheriff boarded up the house. Not much of it survived. The pages were soaked in something that looked like tar but smelled like iron. But the legible parts, those scrawled in frantic strokes between splatters, were more disturbing than the blood itself. One line kept repeating, "It speaks when the stars vanish." At first the town priest thought it was metaphor, madness, but astronomers in the city reported something real that same week, a sudden dimming of the stars above southern Ohio, a patch of sky that simply refused to shine, blacked out like a smudge of ash smeared across the heavens. They called it a celestial anomaly, but John had written it days earlier. Then there were the diagrams, symbols carved into the margins, not in English, not in Latin. Some said Sumerian, some said they were phonetic maps, like scripts made to capture unpronounceable sounds. One looked like a spiral of teeth, another like a man cut into 5 pieces and rearranged to face himself. A scholar from Cincinnati came to review them. He lasted 1 night in the farmhouse. By morning, he'd stuffed his ears with dirt and scratched a single word into the floorboards. Below. The town tried to forget. The barn was raised, the land salted, and the hole, covered in holy ash and chained beneath a slab of iron. They built a chapel over it. No one prayed there. But silence didn't mean safety. In the years that followed, people nearby began to change, slightly, slowly. A woman spoke backwards in her sleep. A boy pulled out his own teeth and said they weren't his. One man stopped blinking entirely and claimed blinking let the dark in. The ground under the chapel would quake sometimes, never enough to break the surface, just enough to remind them. John's journal ended with a final passage, one sentence scribbled in a shaking, unfamiliar hand. It does not want to be worshipped, it wants to be remembered. That's why I'm telling you this, because you're remembering it now. The more you know, the closer it listens. And once it knows your name, the ground under you is no longer asleep. The chapel built atop the hole had no windows. That wasn't an architectural choice. It was a warning, a seal. Every man who worked on its construction was bound by silence, literal, not symbolic. Their tongues were cut before the first brick was laid. Volunteers only, orphans, drunkards, Soldiers turned feral, men with no wives, no children, no one to tell. They called themselves the Hollow Choir, and though they could not speak, they sang. Low, unending, a hum beneath breath like metal dragging across stone. No one knows who gave them the song, only that it had no lyrics, no beginning or end. It just was, a sound that kept something else from answering back. One Sunday in October, the humming stopped. The priest was found kneeling in the aisle, mouth wide open, but his jaw was missing, not torn, gone, as if never there. The walls of the chapel bled condensation, black, sticky, sulphurous. A child wandered in and vomited teeth. They tried sealing the place again. Cement, iron bolts, consecrated fire. It sank 3 inches overnight. A geologist, new to town and skeptical, brought his instruments. He claimed he detected movement, deep movement. Something like lungs below the crust, something breathing, and deeper still, a rhythm. Not seismic, not tectonic, intentional. He wrote, "It's not the earth, it's under the earth, something other, and it's not dead." He left town without his eyes, literally. His colleagues said he stumbled into the university archives, clutching pages he'd torn from his own books, muttering, "We called it down, we fed it with fear." They say the farmer's land was never cursed. That's not the right word. Cursed things have rules. But this was an invitation. A door carved from flesh and ignorance, left cracked open by desperation and blind labor. John didn't dig into hell. He brushed against the edge of something that's been heat. Here long before we named good and evil, a truth older than fear. You're beginning to see it now, aren't you? The story isn't about a man, it's about the thing that wanted him to dig, because it needed a voice. And now, it's found yours. The hole never stopped whispering. Not after they buried it, not after they salted the soil and burned the records. Even now, the wind that moves through the fields in that part of Ohio carries a timbre, not quite a sound, but a suggestion, a pulse. Locals call it the murmur. It's not a sound you hear with your ears, it's one you feel in your stomach, in your spine. Some say it sounds like your own voice, calling you by name, softly, like a memory. Others claim it speaks in a language they've never learned, yet understand completely. People started dreaming of the farmer. But it wasn't John anymore. In the dreams, he's not covered in dirt or sweat. He wears robes. His hands are clean, too clean, as if scrubbed down to the bone. He speaks without moving his mouth, and he always says the same thing. "I didn't dig it. I remembered it." That phrase drove a dozen men mad. One preacher threw himself into the river wearing 50 pounds of chain. A schoolteacher tried to claw out the floorboards of the old chapel with her fingers. A 10-year-old boy recited the entire Lord's Prayer backwards in his sleep for 11 nights straight, and on the 12th he bit through his tongue and smiled. When the federal government stepped in, they didn't deny the hole. That's the strangest part. They built a fence. They stationed guards. But what they feared wasn't what might come out of the hole. They feared what people might start digging. You see, this wasn't the only place. Old maps were cross-referenced. Ritual patterns were discovered. The locations aligned with ancient rites, burial pits, sinkholes, singing caves, and places where compasses spin in circles. Something older than America, older than language, older than names. These places form a web, and the farmer's field in Ohio was the center. Every empire needs a voice. Every throne needs a whisper. Had John touched wasn't hell. It was a signal tower, a broadcast point, a mouth long shut by stone, awakened not by magic, but by man's relentless desire to uncover what should stay buried. You're not watching this by accident. You're remembering, just like he did. The farmer's descendants refused to speak of him. His name was stricken from every family record, every church registry, every land deed. But there was one journal that survived, half-burned, water-damaged, hidden beneath the floorboards of a neighbor's barn. And in that journal were 6 words repeated over and over again, scrawled in a hand no longer sane. The soil remembers more than God. That line, it breaks something in you, doesn't it? Because deep down you know, Memory is not only in the mind. It lives in flesh, in wood, in stone, and in soil, especially soil soaked in blood. People began reporting changes near the old field. Dogs stopped barking. Birds wouldn't land. One farmer's corn began to grow in perfect spirals. Every stalk curved slightly inward, as if bowing towards something underground. Seeds planted in that dirt came up black, not diseased, just black, like the nutrients had been replaced with ink. Children born in that area developed strange behaviors. One little girl, age 3, spoke a dead language fluently. Another refused to look at mirrors, saying her reflection was blinking at the wrong time. One boy, who had never read a book in his life, described in detail a Sumerian temple destroyed over 4,000 years ago. He even drew it, stone by stone. They say madness is contagious. But what if it's communication? What if we mislabel it because we're afraid of what's being said? The government didn't shut down the land. They bought it, quietly, piece by piece. They erected a weather station, some fake cell towers, a research facility labeled agri-nutrient monitoring, but no one goes in, and no one ever comes out. Once a year, men in black suits arrive in unmarked cars. They walk the land barefoot, hands behind their backs. They whisper to the ground like it's a friend they haven't seen in years. You think this is a horror story? This is a user manual. Because once you understand that the earth records what we do, you start to wonder, what else is it waiting to return? And what if those voices weren't warning us? What if they were calling us back? The hole is still there, and it's not closed. They say trauma echoes, but what if trauma resonates, not in the mind, but in the land? After the farmer vanished, and after the government bought the property, strange seismic readings began to pulse beneath the Ohio field. Not earthquakes, not natural, but rhythmic tremors, exactly every 66 hours, 6 minutes, and 6 seconds. Coincidence? The scientists who tracked them? Dead. Every last one. Suicide, or so the reports say. One of them, Dr. Leslie Caro, a geologist from Princeton, left behind only one note, written backwards in mirror text on her bathroom wall. It's not a hole, it's a door. By the time the note was decoded, her body had already been cremated, and when her husband tried to speak out, he vanished too. All that remained was an audio tape left on his doorstep. 30 minutes of static, and one whisper at the very end. We warned you not to dig. Do you feel it yet? That pressure in your chest isn't fear, it's recognition. Some part of you already knows. What lies beneath that Ohio soil isn't from below, it's from before. You've been taught that history is a ladder, civilization is a climb, but that's a lie. The truth is, the past isn't behind us, it's beneath us, buried, sealed, not to protect us, but to protect it from waking. Because long before nations, before kings and popes, there were older powers, and they didn't rule with armies or gold, they ruled with sound. Frequencies that shaped thought, that bent will, that turned men to beasts and cities to tombs. The voices the farmer heard, they were never meant for ears. They were meant for the soil, to open it, to remember. We live on graves, on mass burials of memory, and every time you dig, you get closer to the scream that was buried alive. So next time you pass by a quiet field and feel uneasy, remember this. It's not just the wind you hear, it's breathing. And something down there has waited long enough. When the land breathes, it's not for air, it's exhaling memory. After the government took over the farm, locals whispered of trucks that came in the dead of night, covered, unmarked, no headlights, no sound, just the faint hum of vibration, low, deep, constant, and then silence. 1 week later, a radius of 5 miles around the site was sealed. Officially, soil contamination. Unofficially, witnesses, those few who got too close, reported hallucinations. Not the chaotic kind. No, these were organized, precise, shared. 3 separate men, unknown to each other, described the same thing when found wandering the roads, a burning staircase spiraling downward, made of bone and black stone, a voice, not in their ears but inside their heads, saying only one word: return. They had no memory of how they got there, but all three had soil under their fingernails, blood in their eyes, and one had drawn, in shaking lines across his chest, the ancient Mesopotamian symbol for threshold. The government called them vagrants. Mental illness. Case closed. But here's the problem with lies. They always echo. Within months, the trees in the area began to lean away from the property, as if recoiling. Birds stopped flying overhead, and compasses, useless, spinning like the land was rejecting direction itself. It's not that the place was cursed. No, that would be comfort. It was awakening. And every generation that forgets, every man who chooses ignorance over inquiry, feeds it. You've heard the phrase, don't dig into the past. They weren't being metaphorical, because what if the underworld isn't myth? What if it's buried history? What if hell isn't a punishment, but a containment zone? And what that farmer broke wasn't just ground. It was a seal. You still with me? Then say this phrase below twice in the comments. I remember the voice beneath. Say it not just to engage the algorithm, but to anchor yourself, to choose awareness, because from here on, we go deeper, and what comes next changes everything. The farmer's land was seized, yes, but it wasn't just the land they wanted, it was what lay beneath. They built a structure, a square building, no windows, reinforced concrete, 12 feet high. Some said it was for testing the soil, but no equipment ever entered. Only men in suits, always in pairs, always silent. Locals called it the grey box. It stood like a tombstone on the field, no doors visible, no lights, no sound. But something was wrong with it. Birds wouldn't perch on it, dogs refused to go near, children, even the bold ones, would burst into tears within 50 feet. One night a local boy snuck out with a friend, dared each other to touch it. Only one came back. He was found by the roadside at dawn, barefoot, eyes wide open, staring at the rising sun like he'd never seen light before. He never spoke again. Doctors claimed trauma, but the boy's mother said he began drawing the same image over and over, a circle of 12 figures standing around a pit, each with no mouth, each bleeding from the eyes. And in the center, a shape not meant for human memory. The townspeople grew restless, then sick. Nosebleeds, migraines, dreams that didn't feel like dreams. A council meeting was held. Quiet voices argued. Some wanted to flee. Others believed leaving wouldn't matter, because this wasn't just a place. This was a breach, and breaches expand. An old preacher, half mad from the beginning, screamed at the town hall. You built your homes on cursed soil. You turned your plows against the flesh of old gods. You pierced the eye of the dead, and now it sees you. He was removed by force, died that night in his sleep. Autopsy said heart failure. But here's what they didn't release. Carved into the inside of his chest, yes, the inside, were 3 letters. IXL. It took a scholar from the East Coast to decipher it. In pre-Sumerian, IXL means eye, open. He hadn't had surgery, no one knew how it got there, but someone, or something, was signing its work. You see, some doors don't open with keys. They open with blood, and they don't close once breached. Next, we follow the first whispers that came from beneath, and you'll wish they had stayed silent. You must understand. The first whispers weren't heard with the ears. They were felt. Men would stop mid-sentence, tilt their heads and furrow their brows like they'd heard someone calling their name. But from inside their skulls, mothers clutched their infants tighter, not knowing why. The cows refused to graze near the grey box. Crops wilted in patches, in spirals. And then, it spoke. Not in English, not in any known tongue. The farmer's widow, the only one who still lived near the property, was the first to hear it clearly. She awoke one night drenched in sweat, eyes wide, gasping, not from a nightmare, but from a command she couldn't disobey. She walked barefoot into the field. Later, when they found her body face down in the mud, her fingernails were missing, torn off, scraped away while trying to dig into the soil with her bare hands. There were no signs of struggle, just a look of peace on her face. She'd been smiling, and yet her lips had been sewn shut, not with thread, but with roots that had grown from within her mouth. Autopsy revealed something worse. Her lungs were filled not with fluid, but whispers, literally, microscopic fibers embedded with vibrational residue, frequencies outside the human auditory range. They'd passed through her like breath. Someone had recorded it before the body was cremated. Standard procedure by then. They played it back at half speed. What they heard cannot be repeated here. But I'll say this. It named each man in the room. It told them their sins. Then it described their deaths accurately. One of those men shot himself within an hour. Another tried to burn down the grey box. They found him inside it instead, curled up, fetal, whispering the same word over and over again. Backward, backward, backward. He'd carved it into his skin, mirrored, as if meant to be read in reflection. The local priest said he was speaking in tongues, but not holy ones. No one could explain how the man had gotten inside the grey box. It had no doors, and yet something had let him in. You still think this was just madness? Just folklore? This is the part where the government came. Next, the men in black arrive. But not the kind you think. They didn't wear badges. They didn't introduce themselves. No cars. They walked in perfect formation, 7 of them, all dressed in wool black coats despite the summer heat. Not a single one of them sweating, and their faces, expressionless, not cold, empty, like the flesh was borrowed. The locals called them hollow men, not because of poetry, but because every dog in town refused to bark in their presence. Animals went dead silent, and one old mutt died on the spot, mid-snarl. The hollow men didn't ask questions. They knew where to go, straight to the grey box. What happened inside was never recorded, but 3 hours later, only 6 of them came back out. 1 was left behind, or maybe taken. The farmer's son, still a boy, had watched it all from the woods. What he saw that day never left him. He said, years later in a hospital, clutching a crucifix so tightly it cut his palms, that he saw the missing man fall to his knees inside the box. And then, the ground swallowed him, but it didn't break. It just absorbed him. Absorbed, like a mouth with no teeth, just pressure. After that day, no one was allowed near the property. Fences went up, the soil was sealed under concrete, the local paper was bought out and burned. Anyone who spoke about the whispers disappeared. One old librarian tried to warn folks. She vanished mid-shift. Her glasses were found folded on her desk. But here's the part they couldn't cover up. The silence began to spread, not physically, spiritually. Men who had worked near the grey box reported losing parts of their memory, not due to trauma, but like something had edited them. Wives claimed their husbands changed, not colder, not meaner, just less. As if someone had scooped out something vital and left the shell walking. Whole families moved away. Others stayed and were never seen again. One child who lived 3 houses away from the field stopped speaking altogether. Doctors said her vocal cords were intact, but she refused to use them. When asked why, she wrote 3 words on a scrap of paper. It hears me. That's when I knew. This wasn't madness. This wasn't a cursed patch of land. This was a gateway. And it was still open. You want the truth? That hole was never dug by a man. It was dug for one. The whispers aren't trying to scare you. They're trying to find you. The boy, the farmer's son, tried to leave Ohio in 1874. He made it as far as West Virginia before collapsing on the side of a road, clawing at his ears, whispering over and over, "The dirt is still listening." Authorities found him bloodied, disoriented, and barefoot. They took him in, placed him in a sanitarium. For 12 years he never spoke a word, but every night, like clockwork, he would draw the same thing on the walls of his cell, a spiral, always clockwise, always starting from the outside, each one tighter than the last. The doctors called it obsession, but those who studied ancient symbols recognized something else, a sigil of summoning, an ancient sign seen in burial chambers deep beneath Mesopotamia, in shrines tied to pre-human worship. Some say it's not a symbol of a gate, it's the gate itself, replicated in form. Because here's the darker truth, some doors don't need hinges, they open in the mind. The soil around that farm was tested in secret, decades later, in the 1920s. What the scientists found was impossible. Traces of blood proteins, human and otherwise, bonded with the clay. One specialist said the molecular structure was part organic, part something else. When asked what something else meant, he replied, "Nothing from this earth." Then he vanished 2 weeks later. A man who knew too much. This is what they don't want you to piece together. The whispers weren't just sounds. They were instructions. And those who heard them long enough began to change. Not visibly, no horns, no teeth, no black eyes. But inside, their will was no longer theirs, and they didn't even know it. They began to move like shadows, silent, observant, emotionless, living among others, unnoticed, spreading the silence, becoming vectors of unspoken ideas, thoughts that aren't thoughts, just instructions wearing your voice. You've met them before, haven't you? People who speak but never say anything, eyes that see but never reflect, emptiness wrapped in smiles. These are not glitches in the human condition, they are symptoms of something ancient, something patient, something still growing under our feet. And if you're still here listening, you're not just a viewer, you're a key. You've already started to turn in the lock. The question is, will you open it? A man once tried to burn the farm down. Not the farmer, not his son. This was 1892, long after both had vanished. The man's name was Elias Turner. He was a preacher, the old kind, brimstone in the mouth, guilt in the lungs. He came to the property holding a torch and a Bible, said the land was cursed, said he dreamed of a mouth in the soil calling for flame. He quoted Leviticus as he lit the dry grass. But here's where it turns. The fire didn't spread. It bent. Witnesses say the flames moved around the hole, as if guided, as if repelled, as if something beneath rejected the cleansing. Then Elias dropped to his knees, began to weep, but not the tears of a man overcome with guilt. No, this was different. He wasn't even blinking, just staring at the center of the pit, as if something was climbing up through it, slow and formless. He screamed one word, over and over, "Unmade, unmade, unmade." And then, silence. No breath, no sound, just the wind moving around his still body. The doctors later called it sudden catatonia, but the coroner found something strange. Burn marks, not outside, inside. His lungs were seared, as if he had breathed in flame, but no fire had touched him. The only fire was in the field, and it had already gone out. You have to understand this. We are taught that evil is loud, that it crashes in like thunder, but the older forces, the real ones, they come in quiet, like a thought that isn't yours, like a dream you never remember, but keeps changing you anyway. That land was never about what was seen, it was always about what was invited. The soil wasn't cursed, it was fed, fed by obsession, fed by attention, fed by fear. And every man who touched it left something behind. Their minds, their will, their ability to resist the next step, because there is always a next step. And if you're still with me, still watching, Hey, the next step is you, and now you have to decide, are you watching a story or remembering one? They called it the Red Year. The spring after the digging began. Rain didn't fall like it used to. It came in short, violent bursts, then nothing for weeks. Animals were born dead or disfigured, crops twisted like they'd grown under a different sky. But it was the people who changed first. Quiet at first, withdrawn, some stopped attending church. Others began whispering in the fields, to no one. The school closed when the teacher disappeared mid-lesson. The children said she walked outside and stood over the hole for 3 straight days, never ate, never moved. Then, she was gone. The town's name, Ashes Hollow, was removed from official records that year. No one gave an explanation, but the locals knew why. Something had slipped out, not a creature, not a ghost, something worse, an idea. And ideas are more dangerous than any beast because they root in you, change your shape from the inside. You've heard of mass psychosis, haven't you? That's what modern historians call it, but they weren't there. They didn't see the man who carved runes into his arms using only a stick. They didn't hear the girl recite a language that doesn't exist, but feels older than Latin. They didn't smell the sulfur in the rain. But it was never about belief. Not really. This wasn't religion. This was recognition. Like waking up in a place you've never been, but somehow know your way around. That's what the hole did. It reminded people of something they'd buried long ago, something older than memory, something beneath civilization, beneath morality, beneath the illusion of being human, a hunger. And that's the truth most men never face. We are not born noble. We are trained to pretend, strip away the comfort, the rules, the illusions, and what's left is the void, the gnawing question, what am I when nothing watches? In Ashes Hollow, that question wasn't metaphor, it was the air. And now that you've heard it, it's in you too. The Red Year didn't end because it passed. It ended because it found a new name to whisper. Yours. The federal authorities finally came in the fall of 1857. Not in uniforms, not waving flags. 3 men, suits too clean for farm roads, shoes without mud, faces that didn't blink enough. They didn't ask questions. They went straight to the farm, straight to the hole. No one knows what they said to the farmer or what they took with them, but by the next sunrise the hole had been filled, not with dirt, but stone. Heavy, rune-marked slabs, not quarried locally, chained shut with iron etched in ancient patterns. A priest was brought in from Kentucky, but he refused to even get out of the carriage. Said something was watching him from inside the field, not something he corrected. Many things, and they weren't demons. They were waiting. The town was quarantined. No official reason, just fences, then walls. Then maps started erasing Ashes Hollow altogether. One day you could find it, the next it was as if it had never been drawn. But people remember. A few tried to speak up in the decades after. A doctor, a geologist, even a child who survived. All 3 died violently. One claimed the truth in his final journal. Hell isn't a place we go after death. It's what we bury to keep living. Now I want you to really feel this. What if hell isn't beneath us, but within us? What if places like that hole don't lead somewhere new, but wake up something old, something that was always inside you, but too quiet to notice, until you stood near its echo? That's what the men in suits were really doing. Not covering it up, they were containing it. Because if word got out, if people knew that reality has seams, the whole system would collapse. Governments, religions, science, all scaffolding, all lies wrapped around one terrible truth. The soil remembers, the bloodstains don't fade, and when man digs deep enough, he finds himself. Now look around your own life. Where are the places you're not allowed to dig? What stories were sealed before you were born? What chains lie beneath your dreams? Because once you start asking, You've already heard the voice, and you can't unhear it. By the winter of 1857, the farmer was gone. No obituary, no burial, no record. The neighbors whispered that he never left the land. Some swore they saw a figure standing out there at night, unmoving, long after snow had buried the fields. Not moving, just waiting. Others said the figure wasn't him anymore. The local sheriff, last seen patrolling the edge of the property, turned up in pieces, carefully placed, one limb at each cardinal direction around the hole, no blood, no footprints, as if the body had risen from the earth, not fallen to it. The town preacher started speaking in Latin he never learned. His eyes wouldn't close, even when he slept. He told his wife the truth came in dreams now, and in those dreams, there was always the sound of digging. The most chilling thing. No one could remember what the farmer's name was. A man who'd lived among them for decades, eaten at their tables, traded goods, raised children. They couldn't remember a single letter of his name, as if something had reached backward in time and scrubbed it clean. Not to punish him, but to erase the warning. That's how this works, brother. The system doesn't hide things by burying them under lies. It hides them by taking away your memory that truth ever existed. Every empire that ever ruled has done this. The burned libraries, the rewritten history books, the renaming of streets, cities, people. You think you know your country's past? Look again. Look at who gets statues, who gets erased, whose sins get forgiven, whose voices are never heard again. You see, the greatest horror isn't what was found in that hole, it's what we agreed to forget. Every man has a hole in him, a place he never digs, a silence too deep to question. And the moment you try, the moment you dare to lift the shovel and ask, what's down there, the world moves against you, because you've broke. The first law of the prison: do not seek the door, do not question the walls, do not listen to the voices in the soil, because they're not lies. They're reminders of who you were before you were told to forget. The soil remembers what the mind is forced to forget. And in that cursed field of Ohio, 1856, something ancient remembered him back. They called it madness when the local midwife wandered to the site barefoot in winter, whispering nursery rhymes that hadn't been sung in centuries. They locked her in the church cellar after she tried to carve symbols into the floor. Not to summon, she said, but to warn. I saw his mouth, she kept saying, but it wasn't on his face. They thought she meant the farmer, but she didn't. She meant the whole. She meant the earth itself was speaking. And brother, do you understand what that means? The land we till, the ground we bury our dead in. It's not just passive dirt. It's an archive, a record of every blood oath, every slaughtered child, every broken pact we made and then conveniently forgot. The ancients called it the womb of the Watchers, not metaphorically, literally. They believed that beneath certain fields, those soaked in ritual, blood or betrayal, something alive waits, not demonic, not divine, just awake. The farmer's field. It was older than Ohio, older than the Shawnee who warned not to build there, older than the mound builders who left no written record but carved spiral paths downward in stone. And still, we built anyway. That's the pattern, isn't it? Every time we're told, don't open that, we say, what if we do? We worship progress like a god. But real power doesn't build upward, it descends. Down into tunnels, into vaults, into memory, into things buried for a reason. You were trained, conditioned, to fear looking back. You were told the past was irrelevant, superstitious, conquered. But those who rule you, they obsess over the past, because they know, control the memory, and you control the man. And the moment a man remembers who he really is, what his ancestors knew, what his instincts whisper, he becomes a threat, not to his neighbors, to the system. That's why they call this madness. That's why they call this story a myth. Because if it isn't, then everything you've been taught to forget is real, and worse, it's still alive. The preacher came last, not to bless the land, but to seal it. He walked into that field holding no Bible, no cross, only a rusted key tied to a leather cord. An heirloom, he said, passed down from a time before churches had pews and men knelt voluntarily. He didn't speak. He whispered. Every word seemed to pull the wind closer. Even the birds refused to fly overhead. The farmer watched, half mad, eyes black with sleeplessness, standing next to the hole that had stopped echoing 3 days earlier. The silence was worse than the voices, because now the air listened. The preacher knelt beside the pit and dropped the key in. Then he stood, and in a voice not entirely his own he said, "You asked for proof, but you were given a door." And then he turned to the farmer and laughed, not with humor, with understanding, because the preacher had seen it too. He had heard it, before he ever arrived in Ohio, back when he was a boy in Georgia and his brother had vanished in a tobacco field with soil like wet iron and a scarecrow that no one remembered building. Back when his father warned, there's a line between prayer and summoning, and most men don't know when they've crossed it. But the farmer, he had done more than pray. He had listened too long. And what came through? It needed a voice. That's why the preacher laughed. Because it was already too late. That man was no longer just a man. He had become something echoic, a carrier, a mouth for the memory beneath. Do you see what this means? Possession doesn't require demons. Sometimes it just requires permission. The real question isn't what was in the hole. It's what came out. And what it whispered into a man's soul. Not as a curse, but as an invitation. You've heard it before, haven't you? That strange pull, the dream that repeats, the wordless ache to go back to something older, not from your childhood, but from before you were born. That's how it spreads. Not through blood, through memory. And you're starting to remember. You don't dig a hole like that by accident. No shovel scrapes through blood-heavy soil without a reason buried beneath it. The farmer claimed he was just trying to reach a water vein. But his wife, in a letter found years later behind the fireplace, wrote something else. He dreamed of voices for 13 nights, all calling from under the house. She said he started humming in his sleep. Tunes she didn't recognize, but the dog did. It howled every night at the floorboards, and then, one morning, the farmer just left. No breakfast, no coat, just a shovel and a lantern. He walked into the field before dawn and never came back inside. Neighbors watched from a distance, too afraid to ask questions, because the sky above his farm had started to turn, not storm gray but ash black, like it was remembering a fire no one talked about. And the smell, sulfur, and something older, like time rotting. The sheriff who finally approached him after 3 days said the ground around the hole was too soft, like it had been churned from beneath, not above. That's when the report started. Voices heard near the fence, children speaking in languages they didn't know, and one old woman, blind since birth, said, "I see fire, but it's upside down." By the 4th day, the farmer stopped using the shovel. He started using his hands, nails torn, skin bleeding, digging like something inside him wanted out. And maybe it did, because according to the preacher, the hole wasn't just a passage, it was a mirror, showing every man who stood before it what he feared most, and what he truly served. Think about that. What would your reflection say if it wasn't made of light? If it wasn't bound by what the world told you is real? What if it showed what you've always been drawn to, but were too afraid to admit? That pull toward the strange, the forbidden, the true shape of the woo. Bald, not the painted version. That's not madness, that's memory. And that hole, it didn't just open in Ohio, it's opened before, and it's opening again, right now, in you. The hole never really closed. They covered it, yes, filled it with gravel, salted the earth, prayed in tongues no one recognized. But the sound, it kept bleeding through the soil. Low, constant, like someone whispering your name through the floorboards of the earth. Years later, a surveyor sent to map that field reported his compass wouldn't stop spinning. Animals refused to walk near the spot. Crows flew in circles above it for hours, then dropped dead in the exact same patch of dirt. Every time. One priest, sent from Cincinnati, called it a thin place. Where the veil between this world and the one beneath is paper thin, he said, and something keeps pressing its face against it. What kind of place does that? Not a cursed one, a chosen one. But who did the choosing? And for what? Some say the land was marked long before the farmer bought it. Back in the 1700s, a tribe refused to step foot there, calling it the mouth of the forgotten. They said it ate memory, that people who passed through it came out hollow, missing time, missing language, missing something in the soul. And it didn't just affect the land, it spread. That year, 1856, more than a dozen families within 5 miles reported the same thing, waking up with dirt under their fingernails, dreams of red skies and tunnels lined with faces, and hearing the same word, deeper, every night, in the same voice, their own. You still think it was just a hole? Or was it a keyhole? Because some doors don't open from the outside. They wait. They lure the right hands, the right minds, the right bloodline. And when those hands dig deep enough, it's not hell they find. It's the truth beneath everything we've ever been taught to fear. That what lies below isn't evil. It's us. Before the forgetting, before the masks, before the rules, you're not falling asleep, you're waking up. There's something ancient beneath us. Not fossils, not bones, memory, buried by design. You ever wonder why every ancient culture warns of the underworld but none of them describe it as purely evil? The Greeks called it Hades. The Egyptians had Duat, the Norse, Helheim. Each one. A place not just of death, but of reckoning, not a punishment. A mirror. Because beneath the earth isn't where we bury sins. It's where we bury truth. That farmer in Ohio didn't just dig through soil, he pierced a layer that wasn't meant to be touched. A psychic crust. And when it cracked, something leaked up. Something older than language. We call them voices. But they weren't words. They were codes. Emotions made audible. A warning that your mind wasn't built to receive, unless it was already fractured. That's why it chose a simple man, a man already hollowed by loss, already cracked open by grief, already soft enough to let the message in. You see, the elite don't fear hell. They worship it, because they understand it. It's a well of knowledge, a place where masks melt, where all lies dissolve, where power is raw, brutal, eternal. But to keep that power, they must keep you distracted, tamed. So they call it evil. They hang demons on your nightmares. They build churches on memory holes and fill your head with hymns to drown the signal. Because if you heard it clearly, if you remembered who you are, you'd burn their entire system down. That's why that patch of land in Ohio is still fenced off. Not to keep you out, to keep it in. The hum hasn't stopped. The compass still spins, and on certain nights they say if you lie on the dirt long enough, you'll hear your own voice whisper back. But it won't say your name. It will say the one you forgot, and once you hear it, you'll never look at the sky the same way again, because you'll know. The stars aren't looking down at us, they're watching, and they remember, just like the soil, just like the voices, just like the whole. The only question left is, how deep are you willing to go? The deeper you dig, the more you realize. The earth isn't silent, it's muffled. Something buried it, like a scream caught in concrete. A message pressed down by centuries of noise, distraction, and engineered forgetting. But what if the ground itself was a library? Not of books, but of events. stored like static in the rocks, like blood in the clay. When that farmer dug, he wasn't disturbing soil, he was unsealing memory. And the memory didn't belong to him, it belonged to something else. Let's step back. What do you really know about Ohio in 1856? You think of farmland, simplicity, a growing nation. But hidden in those quiet rural towns were experiments, not in science, but in control. See, the mid-1800s wasn't just the age of expansion, it was the age of containment. The early elite had discovered something terrifying, that certain plots of land held a resonance, a frequency that amplified consciousness. And if the wrong man stepped onto it, he'd wake up, he'd start hearing things. Not hallucinations, instructions, not from spirits, but from the deep intelligence of the earth itself. This farmer wasn't the first to dig, but he was the first to tell someone. He wrote a letter, just one, sent it to a local pastor. I've heard them, I've felt them. They ain't angels, and they sure ain't dead. They want me to go deeper, and I ain't sure I should. That letter never made it to town. The pastor vanished the next day. The postmaster after that, then the town doctor. No violence, no signs of struggle, just gone. And the hole? Covered, fenced, declared unsafe by federal inspectors that no one remembers calling, because when a man hears truth from the dirt, he becomes a threat to the world above, and so they silenced it, buried it again, until now. Because now, you've heard it too. You've touched the edge of something forbidden, and the only reason you're still watching is because a part of you has already been called by the same signal, the same hunger, the same question, what lies beneath your feet, and are you brave enough to listen? There's a reason ancient cultures warned of digging too deep, not because of collapse, not because of demons, but because the earth remembers. And memory is dangerous to empires built on forgetting. That year meant nothing to most, but to the few who understood the resonance of blood-soaked soil, it marked a rupture in the lie. The farmer's land wasn't chosen by accident. It was marked centuries earlier. Back when the land belonged to no one. Back when the tribes wouldn't even speak near that patch of ground. They called it the mouth, not metaphorically, literally, because they believed it spoke when the wind died. A hollow moan, a warning, a craving. But by the time settlers arrived, the warning had become folklore, and then a joke, until that farmer hit bone. Not animal, not human, but something carved, a spiral, etched in something that shouldn't have been stone because it was warm. He said the shovel bounced off it like glass, and when he leaned closer, the sound began, not in the air, in his spine, like someone whispering through marrow. He didn't tell anyone for 3 days. Then the nosebleeds began, then the dreams, then the compulsion to go back, at night, to the hole, to listen. He started speaking in patterns, rhythms that weren't language, and the crow's bears started gathering. Neighbors thought it was madness, until they stood near the pit and felt it too. A pull, as if the earth wanted something from them. Then came the men in black coats. No names, no papers, only tools, measuring the dirt, the air, the man himself. They called it a geological irregularity. But they stayed for weeks, until one night, everything changed. The hole caved in. The farmer disappeared. The black coats vanished. And the town was paid. Hush money. New roads, a train station, a school, distraction, prosperity, forgetting, but not everyone forgot. Because once the earth speaks to you, you don't walk away whole, you walk away marked. And some of those descendants, they live today, hearing whispers in silence, bleeding when it rains, smiling when they dream of dirt. Ask yourself, is that voice in your head really yours? Or is something ancient, something buried, finally calling you home? They called it possession, but it wasn't. Not the way Hollywood sells it. This wasn't a demon with horns or a ghost trapped in grief. It was something older, something that never left. The farmer's son, just 10 years old, was the first to speak again after his father vanished. But what he said wasn't in any language anyone knew. Scholars came, priests prayed. One man brought a phonograph to record him, but the wax melted before he could press record. The boy's eyes turned black every time he spoke. Not metaphorically, jet black, no pupil, no white. And every time he opened his mouth, the walls trembled. The townspeople didn't know what to do. They were torn between fear and guilt, because deep down, they knew something had been unleashed. By them, by their silence, by their refusal to close the hole when it first opened. But here's the part they'll never put in books. The boy drew maps, intricate detailed maps of underground tunnels, winding paths that twisted beneath the earth like veins. He said they were listening corridors. Places where the earth hears men's secrets and stores them. Not symbols of hell, but the archive of sin. Not punishment, but preservation. Everything ever whispered, everything ever hidden, filed, remembered, waiting. And the boy? He became the new mouthpiece. Not just for the earth, but for something within it. One night he stood in the middle of the town square and screamed a single word. Awaken. And everyone who heard it collapsed. Not dead, changed. They rose to their feet one by one. Smiling, eyes empty, voices gone. The silence had returned, not as a curse, but as a communion. They had become part of the earth's memory now, stored, indexed, controlled. You see, the most dangerous prison isn't made of bars. It's made of silence. And if you're quiet long enough, something else will start speaking for you. Whose voice is in your mouth? Think carefully, because it might not be yours anymore. By the time news reached the next county, it was already too late. The town of Marlow Hollow, population erased. Buildings stood, farms still smoldered, but no souls stirred, only that hole, still open, still breathing. A government team arrived, under the guise of geological survey, but they brought no shovels, no notebooks, just a single black trunk. Inside, a device no one recognized, half wires, half bone. It pulsed like a heart. They placed it near the hole, and the ground responded. Not with tremors, but with whispers, thousands of them. Layered voices speaking over one another in impossible harmony. One scientist vomited. Another tore off his earpiece and screamed, "It's not noise, it's names." That was the last public record of the team. Weeks later, the land was quietly fenced off, declared unstable terrain, satellite maps blurred, all documents sealed. But the story didn't end there, because the maps drawn by the boy, those survived. One copy ended up in the Library of Congress, misfiled under apocryphal cartography, as if it were a joke. Another turned up in a church basement in Indiana, pinned to a corkboard under the heading, "Do Not Disturb." The third, it was found stitched into the lining of a dead man's coat. He'd been wandering the woods for days, muttering, "They're still digging." But no one talks about it now. The hole is gone, covered in concrete, trees planted, park benches installed. Children play above the breach between worlds, unaware that beneath them, something waits, patient, listening. Because hell doesn't always burn. Sometimes it listens, it archives, it adapts. And when you dig too deep into the wounds of this world, you don't find monsters, you find mirrors, you find the truth of who, or what, has always been running the show. And once you hear that voice, you can't unhear it. You can run from what's already inside you. And every time a man with a shovel stands too long in a quiet field, the earth remembers. The silence begins again. The hole reopens, and the past calls you back. Home. The land never forgets blood, especially when that blood isn't finished speaking. Decades passed. The town faded from memory, the way all forbidden things do. Official records show a mine collapse. An unfortunate tragedy. No mention of the voices. No mention of the hole. But in 1921, something resurfaced. A shipment of soil samples, misrouted to a university lab in Massachusetts. The package was unmarked, except for one word scratched into the lid: return. The soil inside wasn't ordinary. It was wet. Still, after nearly 70 years. And inside that soil were fibers, like hair, not human, not animal. Microscopic analysis revealed an impossible signature, a DNA sequence looping backward on itself as if the very code was remembering the future. The lab technician who opened the crate quit 2 days later. She refused to speak, only writing one sentence in her resignation letter. It's trying to get out. That same week, campus janitors reported a strange sound in the storage sublevels. Not scratching, not footsteps, digging. Beneath the concrete floor, something was tunneling upward, slowly, deliberately, like it was following a scent. Then the power began to flicker. Students complained of vivid dreams, an underground place, flesh walls, and a farmer with no face holding a rusted spade. He didn't speak, but they all heard his voice. In their heads. Low. Final. You brought it with you. The school shut down the lab that month. Not for the digging, not for the soil, but because too many students were trying to find the original package. Obsessed, drawn, compelled. Something had followed the soil, not in body, but in meaning, in memory. And wherever that memory spread, so did the hunger to dig. They called it soil madness in academic journals, laughed it off as mass hysteria. But the faculty janitor, he was found weeks later in the university greenhouse, digging and singing. But no one could hear his voice. His lips moved, but the sound was gone, because when the hole marks you, it takes everything back, even your words. You see, the hole wasn't just a place. It was a door, and once opened, it never truly closes. By 1933, the story had moved underground, literally. Whispers among freight workers in southern Ohio spoke of a rail line that ran off map. An unmarked track, no schedule, no stops, but at night, they'd hear it. A train, slower than it should be, groaning like metal remembering pain. No lights in the cars, no engineer in the engine. And yet, it moved. People said it ran between old mine shafts, carrying something that wasn't cargo, but hunger. One brakeman, drunk in a bar outside Columbus, told a story nobody ever forgot. He said he climbed aboard one night just to prove it wasn't real. He was never seen again, except 6 months later, a rail inspector found his jacket, folded, laid neatly on a rusted rail. Inside the pocket was a note, in that brakeman's own handwriting. It's not a train, it's the hole, and it learned to move. From then on, freight workers refused certain assignments. They'd quit rather than ride west past Chillicothe. They weren't afraid of dying. They were afraid of disappearing. No body, no echo, no memory, because that's what the hole does. It doesn't devour flesh, it devours presence. It makes the world forget you ever mattered. And if you think this is just myth, ask yourself, why do the official mining records for that year vanish after 1856? Why do old maps show blank spots where that farm used to be? And why, even today, do the trees in that valley grow with no rings inside? That's the detail scientists never could explain. Wood samples cut from the area were solid, dense, but lifeless, like they'd never been born, like the place itself had been rewritten, erased from time forward and back. Only one truth remained, etched into a wooden sign near the valley edge, hung by someone no one could ever trace. What you dig, digs back, and that sign, They say the wood has no grain, as if the tree never had a past. In 1891, a traveling preacher arrived in that region of Ohio. He had no name, no church, only a black leather satchel and a voice that made grown men weep. They called him the Dust Shepherd, said he came from the Dakotas, others said farther. But no one questioned him when he started speaking in the old half-collapsed barn on the edge of the farmer's cursed land. He didn't take donations, didn't hand out pamphlets, didn't speak of Jesus or the devil. What he said was worse. He preached that the earth itself had a soul, and it was angry. He told the crowd that something beneath us had been watching for a very long time, and that the farmer in 1856 hadn't discovered anything. He'd simply woken it up. The Dust Shepherd didn't shout or threaten. He only asked one question, again and again. How deep do you think mercy runs before it turns to memory? By the third sermon, the town's dogs had all gone missing. By the fifth, the water in the wells turned sour. The seventh, no one showed up. Not because they didn't believe, but because their dreams had been filled with scratching. Scratching from beneath. It wasn't claws. It was fingernails. Desperate, pleading. Like thousands of people were buried down there. Alive. Trying to pull the world down after them. A month later, the barn burned to the ground. The Dust Shepherd was never seen again, but locals swear, if you stand in the ashes at night and place your ear to the soil, you'll hear him still preaching. Only now his voice isn't calm. Now it's screaming, begging someone to rebury what the farmer disturbed, begging for silence. Because some truths don't set you free, they invite something else in. And it's not death you should fear. It's the thing that comes before death. The thing that wants to wear your voice and walk in your place. And if you hear it speaking in your own thoughts, it's already too late. By the winter of 1892, the land was silent again. Not peaceful. Silent. Birds no longer flew over the field. Even the wind seemed to avoid it. The new owners, naive buyers from Pittsburgh, tried to settle there. Built a modest home near the well, planted new seeds. But no crop grew. Not because the soil was dead, but because something underneath kept the roots from spreading. One night, the wife, pregnant with twins, woke up screaming. She said a hand came up through the floorboards and touched her belly, not roughly, not cruelly, just claiming. The husband ripped up the boards the next day, expecting rats or delusion, but beneath the floor was compacted earth, and in that earth, fingernail marks, hundreds, all facing upward. He sold the house within a week, took his wife, and left town. No one blames him, because by then, the stories had started spreading. People passing through the area reported strange dreams, always the same, a man digging, a scream, and then complete darkness. But not the comforting kind, the kind that watches. Local children dared each other to stand at the edge of the field at dusk. One boy went missing. They found his shoes, still tied, still clean, sitting perfectly placed at the hole near the center of the field. But no footprints, just drag marks, deep ones, as if he was pulled backwards by something with too many hands. The sheriff sealed the property, declared it off limits by county ordinance, but the damage was done. By spring, the town was half empty. They didn't just fear the land, they feared what it meant. Because if there was one place in America where hell had a front door, how many others were just covered up? How many farms, towns, cities are built on things we buried, not out of ignorance, but guilt? This wasn't just about a farmer in 1856. This was about a pattern, and someone, somewhere, had mapped it. Not to warn us, but to control what comes through. And maybe the farmer wasn't the first to dig. Maybe he was just the first to listen. There's a reason maps change over time. It's not just politics or progress. It's because some places need to be forgotten. Not removed, just blurred. Look closely at old government survey records from 1856. You'll find the farm clearly marked. Now check the same coordinates today. Modern maps, satellite views, land deeds. There's nothing there. No name, no owner, just a blank green space labeled undeveloped. But underground, layers of sealed stone, reinforced metal, and something else entirely. Geologists who've studied the surrounding terrain call it anomaly rich. High electromagnetic spikes, unusual magnetic fields, and whispers, yes, actual recorded whispers, captured on low-frequency seismic microphones. When audio experts analyzed the recordings, one word kept surfacing: deeper, repeated, in different voices, some human, some not quite. But here's the part they don't talk about publicly. Every few years someone tries to go back. A thrill seeker, a podcaster, a fringe archaeologist chasing myths. They never last long. A camera crew disappeared in 2009, all 6 members. Only the drone was recovered, half melted, lens shattered, but still transmitting one final frame, a single open eye, in the dirt. No body, no skull, just the eye, open, alive, staring upward. What happened in that field wasn't just an accident. It wasn't even a haunting. It was a signal. Like someone, or something, was calling for witnesses. But why? That's where it gets darker. Because in a heavily redacted document released by a FOIA request in 2017, a note appears under the subject line, Ohio Incident 56B. Containment appears stable. Entity remains bound by echo field perimeter. Do not allow any future excavation within 100 meters radius. If breach occurs, initiate Protocol 9. Under no circumstances should audio be amplified. Repeat, do not amplify sound. Why war about sound? If there's no one left to hear it? Unless it's not about hearing, it's about responding. Something dug up in 1856. Something buried again, but not silenced. And maybe, just maybe, it's still waiting. Waiting for another man with a shovel and a reason to listen. You ever wonder why some digging stops suddenly? Not because of money, not because of labor shortages, but because of something beneath the soil that stares back. There's a photo, grainy, barely legible, from the farmer's personal belongings. They say it was taken the night before he disappeared. It shows a wooden sign, handwritten, nailed to a stake over the mouth of the pit. The words, not a well, not a grave, a door. That's it. No name, no explanation, just that warning. A door. But a door to what? You think hell is fire and pitchforks? That's the cartoon version they sold you. The real thing is colder. Not heat, not pain, but disconnection. No voices, no feeling, just a pressure behind the eyes, like something watching you from inside. Researchers who studied the farmer's journal found an odd pattern in his handwriting. The deeper he dug, the more cramped his letters became. By the final page, every word looked like it was written by someone trying not to wake something up. He wrote, "I think it's listening to me breathe." Then, I tried to stop digging, but the shovel moved on its own. And the final line, etched with such force it tore the paper, "It's not a hole, it's a throat." You still think he was just delusional? Then why did 3 separate government agencies seal the site in concrete and mark it as a wildlife sanctuary? Why were no records filed about his disappearance? Why was his wife paid a lump sum and sent to live under a new name in Vermont? And here's the real kicker. Satellite thermal scans from last year show heat signatures rising from beneath the earth where the hole used to be. Something's breathing. Not metaphorically, literally, slow, rhythmic, like lungs, the size of houses. So let me ask you, what happens when it fully wakes up? What happens when someone, someday, answers the voice calling from below? Because it's not asking questions anymore. It's calling names. You were never meant to hear this. In 1937, an unmarked military unit arrived at the abandoned farm under the cover of night. No lights, no noise, just a convoy of matte black trucks and men in uniforms without insignia. Neighbors were told it was a termite operation. But termites don't need lead-lined suits. They brought a device, massive, mechanical, with a rotating drill and sensors that looked like they belonged on another planet. It wasn't to dig further. It was to listen. For 3 days the machine ran non-stop, tuned to frequencies far below human hearing. What they recorded? Gone, sealed, filed in a vault at Fort Detrick, never to be released. But one engineer broke protocol. He kept a copy, hid it in a phonograph cylinder inside a false-bottom drawer in his home. His grandson found it. He said the sound wasn't screaming. Not at first. It was chanting. Layered voices, speaking a language older than Latin, older than Sumerian. It didn't sound angry. It sounded hungry. And then it shifted, from chants to a single word, over and over. Unbury, not discover, not release. Unbury. You feel that? The pressure behind your ears right now, that's not psychological, that's resonance. See, certain truths don't just inform you, they reformat you, like sound waves shaking a glass until it shatters, like frequencies breaking a man's mind open from the inside out. Why do you think every ancient culture warned about the mouths beneath the world? Why do you think tunnels were once filled in, not explored? Because beneath every civilization, every church, every empire, there are older structures, bones of something vast and half asleep, with thoughts that echo through generations. The farmer didn't awaken it. He just reminded it we're still here, and now you know. So listen carefully from this moment on, to your walls, to your floorboards, to the dirt beneath your home, because the voice doesn't always call with words. Sometimes it just waits, until someone like you starts digging. The truth wasn't buried to be forgotten, it was buried to keep us out. But once a boundary is crossed, even unknowingly, something ancient watches, and it doesn't need eyes. By early 1857, months after the digging stopped, strange events began plaguing the surrounding region, not just on the farm, but within a 17-mile radius, precisely measured from the center of that hole. Livestock were found turned inside out, not torn but inverted, organs perfectly preserved. Children woke screaming in languages they never learned, and clocks, hundreds of them, stopped at the same exact time, 3:33 a.m., every single night. The church tried to intervene. A new priest came from Cincinnati, one who'd studied obscure Vatican texts. He walked the field once, just once, then refused to return, muttering something about the breath beneath. He died 11 days later, alone, lips sewn shut with black twine. Officially, self-inflicted injuries during a psychotic break. Unofficially, the note found in his coat pocket said just one thing: it hears what you think. That same winter, people began to vanish, not all at once, but piece by piece. A woman was found standing in the town square, barefoot, eyes white, hair fallen out, whispering, "He's under us," still listening. Then she collapsed into dust, literally, not a corpse, not bones, dust. Scientists said she had extreme calcium deficiency, but her teeth were still intact. And then came the dreams. Not ordinary ones. Everyone, even those far from the farm, described the same thing: an inverted tree, its roots in the sky, its branches made of stone, and beneath it, a face, carved into the earth itself, not smiling, not frowning, just waiting. Do you understand what this means? This wasn't a haunting, not a ghost, not a demon. This was an awareness, buried below the soil like a second mind beneath you. The feet, older than man, older than thought. And by disturbing its chamber, the farmer didn't release it. He gave it permission. You don't need to believe any of this. But tell me, why is your screen flickering right now? Why is your stomach sinking? Because you're not just hearing the story, You're remembering it. And you were there, weren't you? This is it, the final layer. The part they really didn't want you to hear. You think this story was just about a farmer, a hole, a haunting? No. That was the cover memory, the decoy truth wrapped in folklore. But the symbols, the signs, they were never meant for the public. They were for those who could see beneath. You. This goes deeper than Ohio, deeper than 1856. Across ancient cultures, Sumer, Akkad, even pre-dynastic Egypt, there are references to the listening ground, a patch of soil that wasn't just alive, but sentient, reactive. In 1923, a suppressed geological report leaked from a French expedition in Algeria. They found something eerily familiar, a spiral-shaped borehole lined with petrified bone. Same spiral, same diameter, same echoes. Their instruments recorded whispers coming from beneath the earth, not vibrations, voices. They shut it down, buried it, burned the findings. But it didn't start there either. There's a Sumerian tablet, codenamed Tablet 9X, never shown to the public. It doesn't speak of gods or kings. It speaks of a man who dug, who opened the mouth of the void, and how the land punished him by infecting his bloodline, forever marked by silence, madness, and eventually disappearance. Now go back to the farmer. The whispers, the voices from below, the dust, the inverted tree and the dreams. This wasn't an isolated event. It was a ritual, not conducted by him, but through him. The soil chose its instrument, and now that you've heard this, now that the image is etched in your mind, the spiral has begun for you too. Why do you think they bury truth? Not to hide it, to feed it. Because truth, when it's dark enough, becomes alive. You've made it through all 33 sections. But something in you is no longer the same. And if you've really been listening, if your heart has been beating faster, your sleigh ep heavier, your thoughts a little disjointed, you've been marked. Now write this in the comments twice to complete the circle. I heard the silence beneath the soil. I heard the silence beneath the soil. Let them see you're awake. And whatever happens next, don't dig, don't listen, and above all, don't remember.